In this episode of the Exploring Information Security podcast, how to create user-centric security.
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I'm your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring creating user-centric security. With me to do that is Javvad Malik, lead security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. Feedback for the show can be sent to timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn and let me know you listen to the show, and I will happily connect. You can also rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That really helps spread the show to others that might be interested in this content. So some events coming up. Show Me Con. Early bird tickets are now available, so I definitely recommend checking that out. It is one of my favorite conferences of the year. I pretty much put it on my calendar that we're going to this one, so I will be there. If you heard my kind of man on the street, just walking around the hallway con stuff, I'm going to do some more of that stuff, as well as set up like a booth and do some other stuff. Me and Dave are working on some ideas around that, so really looking forward to contribute to the conference, but then also actually going and catching up with a lot of people and also learning a lot. You learn tons there, so definitely check it out. This episode with Javvad was really, really awesome. I always like talking to Javvad, and he's had like a bunch of articles recently about kind of just implementing security and doing it in a way that makes sense, because you can put controls in place, but that can then lead to frustration by the user, which then leads to shadow IT. So within security, we really need to be, and this has been a theme throughout for the last several years, is enabling the business, and I think user-centric design is really at the core of a lot of that, of how you put those controls in place that makes sense. So this is something that I've always employed. I've been really successful at. I haven't had a lot of people swear or yell at me when I'm putting different controls in place, and I've worked with a lot of different groups, from IT to developers to people outside of the technology space, and I've really employed a lot of the tactics and ideas that we've talked about, and I've been really successful. So I really like these ideas. Again, it's just a way to get better security controls in place and really make the company more secure, so your day doesn't get interrupted with an incident that turns into like a full-blown breach. So with that, let's get right into it.
That's what I like to do, and I do it to people all the time. Of course, doing that in the security industry can be a bit of a problem sometimes, especially with people I know that want stuff off the record. But yeah, sometimes, because again, I just want this to be a conversation. It doesn't have to be very strict. But yeah. It did too. I did get a chance to read your other two articles. It seems like I was just like, man, he's on fire right now with all the blog posts he's putting up on KnowBe4. And one of them was again, because we're talking about user-centric, kind of security, right? One of them was also going to IKEA. So I mean, where's all this kind of coming from? Because it seems like a theme that's going on right now for you is the Disney article, which was brilliant, right? Where they didn't set anything down until they figured out where people can actually walk. So you're not having to put stuff and making it inconvenient to people. Yeah. And I was like, this is just such a great idea. And something I feel like I've always kind of naturally done is I usually go into a job, and the first 3 months is just sit and listen, not even trying to put necessary things in place. But even working with new groups, it's often I want to understand what they're trying to accomplish, because I don't want to input those security controls that cause issues for them. So I guess where did this kind of idea come from for you?
Yeah, so this has been like broadly a topic I've been focusing on for a while now. It's like it's not so much, because you look at when people make mistakes in the workplace, or when someone clicks on something and brings down something or what have you. Yeah, sure. Work for a training company, so yeah, training's important. But really it's like, how have we built these systems that make it so easy to make these mistakes? And why have we built these systems in a way that they invoke these reactions in people that is like, oh, I have to go get my YubiKey again, or my, what have you, which is a fantastic control. I love YubiKeys, but even I'm like, I've been left it at home sometimes, or I've like, it's not there. Then you have to jump through like 50 hoops to get the authenticator on your thing and what have you. So that's kind of like the seed of it. And what I tend to do is I'll take my thoughts, I'll break it down into different analogies, and I'll start writing blogs about it and see what resonates well with people. Kind of like, I suppose I do it like a bit like a comedian trying out new material. They go to like one of those small gigs and they try out new material and they see what sticks. And eventually this will make it into a presentation or a bigger report down the line. So all themed around human-centric design, what we can do like with our existing tools, and what do we need for the industry to change to make it better for people.
Yeah, I think too, the technology has gotten, and you've been in the field like I have for a really long time, the technology's gotten so good. And that's where I think I do feel like I see a shift towards, and that's not just because I've jumped into the security awareness field, but I feel like there is a bigger shift towards companies focusing on that and putting, because again, we can put all the technology in place, but all it takes is like one person to click on something or do something or engage with something. Again, not necessarily their fault, because they don't understand, the ramifications all the time. And they're essentially getting tricked too. But so putting other stuff in place that really makes sense. I like that. And I worked with developers for several years too, and I was like, they really challenged me on, you can't just put controls in place, because then no one's going to use our app, and at that point, I'm out of a job, right?
Yeah. I think that's another thing. It's like, I love this quote, and I think it applies to the world of security so well. It's like, do you want to be helpful or do you want to be right? And I think a lot of times in security, we sacrifice being helpful at just to be right. We want to say like, hey, this length of password is exactly what you need because I can prove it. And, if you have this level of supercomputer, it's going to crack it in this way. And therefore I am right that you need a password. And we'll get engaged in these sorts of long debates, which are fine from a theoretical point of view, but it doesn't mean a lot to the average user. And it really puts in place that roadblock. And it's like people don't want that. They just want to get on with their jobs. So just make it simple, make it easy for them. Just have it like, make a password manager available for them, and they can forget about what their password is and how to set it and what makes a strong password or not.
Could you have an example in your experience of putting a security control in place that kind of follows along these user-centric principles?
So I think one of the easiest places to look, and some place that we've seen happen quite well, is like when you look at shadow IT, it's why are people using these tools which we have explicitly forbidden them? And they're actually trying to tell you something there. They're saying that the tools that you actually provide us suck. They don't meet our needs. So it's like, I want to use Dropbox. I don't care what this weird other thing that you've provided is. It just doesn't work. It's slow. It's clunky. It doesn't synchronize with my mobile device. And so then you can, and I've seen companies do this. They've taken that feedback and they said, okay, we'll let you use Dropbox, but we're going to buy the corporate license for it, and we're going to put in the monitoring controls and the other controls that we need so that we can monitor effectively and secure it. And then everyone's happy, because from a corporate perspective, you've got that governance in place and you can monitor, and it's secure, for lack of a better word. And the users are happy because they've got an interface they're familiar with and they enjoy using.
Yeah, and unfortunately, sometimes that's not even the security team, right? Because I've been in scenarios where it's you have to have that support at the very top to say, yeah, go buy the tools. Because I've heard, I've worked in scenarios where it's like, well, they don't want to buy the enterprise version, so we have to use all the consumer grade stuff, which, like you said, doesn't give us all the controls that they need. And to your point, people are going to use stuff that's convenient. So if it's just a link that they can go download or share files, they're going to use Google Drive. They're going to use all this different stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's it's really like, instead of like having that knee-jerk reaction of like, stop doing that, why, this is not approved. It's like, hey, I think the conversation just needs to change. Like, hey, why are you doing that? Sometimes it's like, hey, I didn't know there was a corporate option available, which is great. So it's an educational gap. Other times it's like, that doesn't work for me. I need this. Other times it's like, I just have no time. I just need to do this. And that really opens a conversation. And I think that's where we really need to get to. It's like a two-way conversation. It's I recently wrote a blog comparing Tetris to Minecraft. And I think Tetris is like the old school mentality where everything comes from top down and you're forced to juggle these things quicker and quicker until you can't anymore. Whereas Minecraft it's another blocky game, but there's no real rules there. You're allowed to be creative. You're allowed to do whatever you want within the confines of the game. And as a result, that's also like super. It's like, I think it's like the second most popular game ever or something. But it just shows that I think in the corporate culture, we've also changed that top-down dictatorial approach doesn't really work as well as maybe it did in the 70s or 80s or 90s. Nowadays, people want that more freedom. They've tasted that remote working and mobile devices and bring your own device and all that kind of stuff. So we need to adapt our policies and controls accordingly. Otherwise, we're just going to add to that friction.
Yeah, I feel like shadow IT's kind of always been around because I worked at like 10 over a decade ago. I worked at a Department of Juvenile Justice, and you want to talk about kids that can get around web filtering. Like, kids are super smart, and people are always going to find a way around this stuff. And often we lean on policy and other stuff. But that's the other thing I like too, is having like clear policies that people understand, because those can get very wordy. So I really like your idea of like, let's have a conversation. Let's figure out, like, try to understand the why behind something doing it. And you also mentioned in one of your articles was not looking at the symptoms, but looking at the root cause of stuff and really digging into what's actually happened there and why.
Yeah. It's like, even when we do the simulated phishing trainings, there's a few companies I know, what they do is if someone falls for one of them, they actually have a box there, a freeform box that says like, hey, what were you doing at the time, or why do you think you fell for this? And sometimes people say, look, I was multitasking, or I just woke up and I was on my phone, or I've had a tough day, or whatever. And what you see a lot of the time, it's not a lack of knowledge that caused people to make that mistake. It's us humans being human. And I think if we don't take time to understand that, what's the natural reaction is like, you failed this, here's some more training. And they're like, but I already know this. It's not that I didn't know this, because, we know myself, like, we've all fallen for these sorts of things before. And it's not because we don't understand that these things happen. It's just we're distracted, or we're overworked, or something. So we need to be mindful of that as well, as opposed to just like, Cobra Kai, more training, failure does not exist in this logo.
I absolutely love the freeform box too. I didn't even thought about that, because then you're also getting them engaged, and they probably feel that they're getting heard and understanding. And like what I tell people as my story is, I've fallen for my own fish before. I mean, and you're exactly right. It's the exact same scenario that a lot of the other people. It was like 8:45 in the morning. Caffeine hadn't kicked in. I was waiting for a package, and we did a package fish in December, which is what a lot of security teams, because that's what's flying around too, right? Yeah. And so I clicked on it 20 days after the fact, and I went, oh crap, but I said, this is going to make a great story, because I've been telling people, I've gotten half of the IT team, I've gotten half of the security team, I've gotten our CISA, I've gotten people that know that they should know better, but with the right triggers and the right things. And so that's where I actually have a lot of empathy for people that like fall for this stuff, is because, and really what I tell them, it's not meant to be a gotcha type of thing, right? It's meant to be hey, we're practicing on this. We're training it a lot like a sports team, practice. I want you practicing on my stuff. So when you face the actual malicious fish, you're going to do a better job with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And I think this is something I wish every admin who's in charge of rolling out this kind of training or phishing to people, they really got on board with that. It's not a gotcha exercise. If you want to make it a gotcha exercise, you can catch anyone out any day of the week, but you're not going to make any friends that way. And
no, you're not.
and it's interesting. I read this report. There's a global hotel chain, and they done a customer satisfaction survey on a bunch of things like, how was your room, how was your breakfast, how was the facility? And they found that people that scored higher they were happier with their check-in experience. They scored everything else higher, even if everything was the same. So two people could stay in the same hotel during the same time, get the same facilities. But if one had a better check-in experience, their overall scores would be higher. And I thought that was so telling. And I think it's something we need to bear in mind, that sometimes a phishing email is the first time someone's going to interact with the security team. And how we leave them feeling is going to influence them subconsciously or consciously. Is going to influence how they're going to feel about us going forward. So, we don't want to set up that they're here to get us out, or they're the Department of No, or whatever the other terms they probably use that are not polite to repeat here. But, if we can make that a good experience, then, we'll have friends on our side.
Yeah, I like that check-in experience because, you're absolutely right. The first impression, and really, even it might not even be the phishing simulation. It should be trying to get in the onboarding and explaining some of this stuff. And I like that. Trying to get back to the user-centric is also that, like, that was someone that did a survey that really wanted to understand the root cause, not the symptom. Oh, they can complain about this or that in the survey, but what they really found was that the first interaction is just, and we've known this for a while, right? First impressions, you talk about it in interviews and other stuff, that can be huge for how people perceive you going forward.
Absolutely.
So how can organizations like balance those security needs versus like a user-friendly workflow?
So I think one of the things we have access to today that probably like 10 years ago, the technology was the ability to monitor and measure human behavior a lot more better than what we could. So we can see with a lot more accuracy what people are doing on the network, whether they're using shadow IT apps, whether they're emailing stuff to their home address, or, whether they're clicking through stuff without thinking about it. And like you said in the beginning, the best thing to do when you start a new place is just observe for 3 months and just build up that baseline. And I think with that, if we can monitor people's behaviors, we can build up a baseline of like what is working, what isn't working, and then really start to open the conversations in those areas, which are, the high risk areas, because you can't tackle everything at the same time. But, you want to understand, okay, there's this one team that we've outsourced in Thailand, and they're always doing X, Y, and Z. Why are they doing that? And sometimes having the conversation, you realize, we have a lot of bandwidth issues, maybe, or maybe there's power outages. Well, South Africa is a great example. They have a lot of load shedding, like power outages, and so they're running on UPS. So they're trying to avoid doing certain things during that time because they want to conserve their generators and what have you. And it's only until we start having those conversations that we begin to appreciate what the challenges are. And then we can design something around that. So we can do something that batches stuff better, or, what have you, or change some of the business requirements. But equally, it gives us an opportunity to explain to people why we have certain controls in place and why they are so important. Because sometimes people just don't realize, like, what difference does it make if I send something to my home email and just work on it from my home computer, or my home computer is clean. I've never got a downloaded virus in like 20 years. So, I'm a safe person. So, all these sorts of things, I think, it really helps. But I think observing and understanding what is happening, and then finding ways to engage people and using those learnings to implement things that, and sometimes it's like any risk management approach. Sometimes you just have to accept that this is just a way, and we're just going to have to keep fighting this battle. Sometimes there's no workaround, but a lot of times there are workarounds.
Well, yeah. And I think too, like I mentioned before, it's kind of budget too. It's like sometimes you just have to collect this and then send this up. And that's actually before we get to the metrics, because I do want to kind of dive into metrics a little bit, but like, I think too, understanding different cultures, like you're talking about in South Africa, that's an infrastructure thing, but they have a different culture than someone in the US. There's also, I think, understanding the time of year, like here in the US, summer is usually it slows down a little bit, and this is different, but it can also depend on your industry and other stuff. So it's like there's a bunch of different factors that really need to be considered when we're talking about how people work and operate within organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So the metrics, like how do you apply, or what? Because I like that we've talked kind of about a couple studies, people looking at paths, like how can a security team use metrics then, or if you have like an example, or of an organization that does like uses metrics in a specific way. I like the form stuff, but is there a way to really apply metrics to better understand workflows and how people work within an environment?
Yeah, so we have so many technologies now. So everyone's got some sort of EDR. Everyone's got some sort of network technology. Everyone's got there's stuff natively built into your operating system that gives you all the data. So it's a bit of effort to try and filter out and pull these out from a human lens. So you don't want all the data. And obviously there are tools and providers out there, but you can do this yourself. But what you can do is you can focus on several behaviors. So like things like plugging in USB drives that aren't sanctioned by or aren't permitted, or people that click on stuff, or people that visit dodgy websites. So rather than trying to be very specific and saying how many people are visiting gambling websites, you want to build up more of a broader profile, like how many people have, I suppose, dodgy website browsing habits. They're going to streaming sites or what have you. So maybe these are things that you don't necessarily block, but you just observe. And then because it gives you an indication of someone that is, carefree in that regard. And is this something that's only restricted to one individual, or is it restricted to a group of people or a certain department or something like that? So I think what you can do is you can build up a really good sort of like several point kind of like spider chart, like how's this person browsing behavior? How are they in reporting phishing emails? How are they effective in taking their training on time? How are they in plugging in unknown drives? So what you do, you build up kind of like a multi-dimensional model of an individual or of a department or of an organization as to see like where some of your pain points are. Because I think that's something that we don't drill into enough. We just say, this is dodgy behavior. And we don't identify exactly what's the driving behavior behind it. So doing that, you can actually then get smarter in assigning a meaningful metric to it. So if you've assigned values to like, someone going to these sorts of websites is X times more risky, you can aggregate everything together and say, okay, your overall risk score is like 100% being you're the most secure person in the world, and 0% you can say, okay, you're a 75% secure person, or your behaviors are 75% secure. And then as an organization, you can say, okay, we want to aim for, over 80% or over 85% or 60, whatever your tolerance is. And within that, I think what you can do is it allows you to make smarter decisions as to what you want to implement. So if someone is, say, ignoring their training, clicking on every phishing email and what have you, you can start locking down their machine a bit more. So you can say, okay, this person is always doing this. Our training's not working. We've tried hardware. They're a trader. They're very busy. They're very important. They don't want to listen to anything. Okay, let's start blocking actively certain websites from their machine so they can't get to it. Or let's block their USB drive or whatever it might be. You can start taking meaningful interventions. Similarly, when you onboard someone new, you can automatically have them at a lower risk until you can baseline them after 3 months, 6 months, once they've gone through their probation, once they've done all their familiarization with the organization. Then you can say, okay, now we're going to release that and let you become a more secure person on the thing. But up until that point, you're more susceptible to make a mistake or do something that you're not aware is the right way of doing, or you're going to get phished via LinkedIn or something because you announced a new job. So I think it's not so much one metric, but it's like understanding a collective of metrics of behavior, human behavior, and then applying that at an individual, but also a global scale across the organization, which, you could say that's your security culture score or something to that effect.
Yeah, I've seen a couple security awareness programs where they're doing kind of like a overall risk score, but I do like essentially what you're saying is like why, right? And that's why with the metrics, once you understand like what do we want to understand, or say I do like the org level of looking at stuff and saying, okay, where's our risk at? Like, what is our biggest concern? And then understanding that risk and then putting metrics around that. Because I feel like with, we have KnowBe4 as well. With that, we are, doing a lot of that kind of trying to figure out where people are at, like their risk score, but then also are they completing their training? So we're looking at all these different numbers, and then we're trying to understand, okay, why aren't people completing their training more?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the Simon Sinek talk. It's everything is to do with why.
yeah. Well, it's also the other thing I really like that I've heard, you've probably heard, is ask why like 5 times.
Yeah,
because then you're going to really get down to the root cause of what's going on with something.
Exactly. And I think what that also helps us to understand is many times we something looks like technology, but it's actually driven by human behavior. And the best example of this that I read recently was that of Uber. And they said, like, why is Uber successful? And all these people were saying, it's because like the technology is great and what have you. And they were like, no, it's actually, that's only a part of it. What it does is it removes the unpredictability or the unknown from the element, the uncertainty. People like to be reassured. Before Uber, you would have to go out and you didn't know whether there's going to be a cab there or whether they're going to be taking you there or how much it's going to cost or who your cab driver is going to be. But this way, you could be within the restaurant and you know exactly how far a cab is, who the driver is, what their rating is, how much it's going to cost you. So removing that uncertainty is what makes it so appealing to people. The technology is just what delivers that, but the actual thing is you're targeting a human behavior. And that's what that 5 whys help you get to. Is like, why do you use Uber? Because it's on my phone. But why? Because why? But why? And I think you get to that core, but it's human behavior at the end of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How do you suggest organizations continuously iterate and improve their security based, like on user feedback?
Well, that's just like any. It's like we should always be doing that, isn't it? Isn't that the Andrew check?
Ideally, yes.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things. Like there's a couple of factors, isn't it? So we either have to change things based on external factors like the threats that are coming in, or we change them based on like the changing environment that we operate in. So, maybe you were on-prem and now you're all cloud, or whatever, or you're all office and then a pandemic hit and now you're all remote. So all these things. So I think based on whatever triggers a change or a requirement to move away from that baseline, you should look at that and just reevaluate, okay, you used to be an office worker, now you're a hybrid worker. How does that change? What things are, and a lot of people will say, you've probably experienced it yourself. When you're at home, there's all these unnecessary meetings that crop up, like, just almost like one after the other. And the worst thing I find is that the way that like Google Calendar or like a lot of the Zoom or Teams app, the minimum time you can schedule a meeting for is like 30 minutes. So everyone's, within like 4 meetings, and that's 2 hours of your day gone straight away. So, I would say for that, if there's a way you can centrally change the default settings, so the default time for a meeting is 15 minutes or 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that way you can like end up being far more productive and, things are kept more to point. And I think that those kinds of things, there's no right methodology as such to kind of like root out everything, but we need to keep our eyes out like what's generating friction, or where is security not being adopted wholehearted, and what can we do to fix it? Because a lot of times it's a change in some scenario that has facilitated that.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like priority, and then like what is the actual like the priority of it, like. because I've seen a lot of security teams just get bogged down in like a bunch of low stuff. They read something out on the internet, but it may not necessarily apply to their industry or even their own user base. So I think, like you've talked about, is having that baseline and understanding where we're deviating it from.
Yeah. And there's that, is it called the Eisenhower matrix? It's like the important, urgent.
Mm-hmm.
And
the four squares.
The four quadrants. Yeah. So, I think security is a prime example of people that spend their time in the top left quadrant all the time because things are important and urgent. And there's always someone shouting on the other end. Yep. And we don't focus so much on the stuff that's important to do. But because there's no urgency, we just that's a Q3 project we will do next year.
Yeah, which is also really hard for, because I feel like in security you're always kind of living on this edge of something's gonna happen, and we're gonna be held, like we're gonna ones that have to dive in, but then we're also gonna get held accountable. Why didn't we have these protections? Why didn't we have these? So it feels like you kind of have to. You almost feel like you have to boil the ocean, and really, that's not gonna be a very successful approach, because you're gonna be kind of a little bit everywhere instead of focusing in on like what actually matters. Again, I feel like this could just be the whole why podcast. Just go back to like what actually matters and why does it matter.
Yeah and I think it's also about turning the priorities around, and instead of letting the external environments or your user or the environment always dictate to security what your priority should be, you should set your priorities and then proceed with those as prioritize them in that. And I know it's easier said than done. Well, I think we all experience that it's easier said than done, but we need to at least know what our couple of priorities for us are, as opposed to just always being reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. Setting some sort of priority. Like there is some, oftentimes it is like, hey, we need to get this technology in place for like giving everyone a password manager, for example, right? That's usually, I feel like identity and PAMs are like a big topic right now, as far as making sure people have the right privileges. So
yeah.
What are some resources you'd recommend for kind of diving in to this topic?
So I would recommend anything in the behavioral sciences field, or like, stuff like BJ Fogg stuff, or the book like Nudge or Nudge Theory, books on advertising or marketing. That's where all the knowledge resides, I think. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's everything has already been done, and it's been done really well for decades. So we understand, we have a good understanding of human behavior and what makes them tick and how to get them to stick and change. So we just need to take some of those learnings and apply them to our field. And this is where I think we are seeing a lot more organizations hiring people who don't come from a traditional tech security background, but they're coming from non-security, from communications backgrounds, from marketing backgrounds, and they're running these things with the as a human-centric, as a behavior-centric campaign. And I think those ones are the ones that we'll see becoming the gap between them and the everyone else will begin to widen over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that too. Psychology, it goes back to the human behavior. I studied social engineering for a while, and I was amazed too at how, you talk about breaking into a building, but you can really flip that and use that internally at an organization. Now, you don't want to do it in a manipulative way, but I tell people it's like a genuine, because again, social engineering is a lot about human behavior. Yeah. And then another example is this election. I actually had Renee DiRista on a few episodes ago to talk about disinformation, and I loved what you said about Nudge and Nudge Theory. I didn't even realize that was a book. I'm gonna go look that up. But that's exactly what disinformation is, right? It's they're not even taking over the system, they're just nudging people in like a direction that they want. And I feel like we could probably use that internally too, to nudge people towards better behaviors that are going to be more secure and really build that security culture. Yeah,
absolutely. And you see it everywhere. It is slowly makes its way everywhere. Like I was recently a few months ago in summer, I was in Germany and I rented a car, and you know how it is, the Autobahn is great, and you can really put your foot down. But there's so much technology in there that sort of gently nudges you. So if you start driving off without the seatbelt on, it starts beeping at you. If you drift out of your lane, it's all like the steering wheel rumbles at you to try and like, get back into your lane properly. If it reads the road signs, and then it will like beep you if you sort of like start going over the speed limit for that particular stretch of road. So none of this is like stopping you. So if you wanted to drive without your seatbelt, you could. It's just a little nudge. It's like a little reminder, and that doesn't feel as confrontational. It doesn't seem as and so like here in the UK we have you have speed cameras, which like, so if the limit's 50 miles per hour and you're going 56, it will take a photo of you and you'll get a fine through the door. But if you, but they have another type of display, which is shown to be more effective at slowing people down. It doesn't take a picture or anything. It's just a display, and it will display your speed on it as you're driving. And then it'll have a smiley or a sad face with it.
Are you really?
Yeah. So if you're driving under the speed, it'll be a green smiley face, and if you're over the speed, it'll be a red angry face, and that's about it. It's like and those have been shown to be so effective because it's a little nudge, and you're just suggesting, hey, look, I'm sad, I'm disappointed. And that actually, people like slow down, because then it's no longer a confrontational issue. It's not like you're going to get penalized by it, but you kind of like, I should probably make better choices with my life.
That is brilliant, because we're very much an emoji type of culture, right? Where when you say something on a message, or even LinkedIn, for example, right? You want likes. Like when you get likes, and it gives you that little bit of I guess an endorphin hit, right? Yeah. Someone liked my stuff, right? And so that's the same concept, just for the speed limit. That's brilliant. I love that. Mm-hmm. And I really hope that security people can, like, because I think we have these ideas that we can do internally. The feedback form, again, another great one. But I think there's multiple ways that we could do it. And you're absolutely right. Doing marketing and ads, that's definitely something I've been into a lot more. And I've been like, oh, okay, this is really just psychology and human behavior and getting people to engage in stuff.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes it's just about reframing something to make it seem acceptable, because sometimes people just don't know how to. But as soon as you can assign a label to it or some sort of like cool behavior to it. And I was reading in the 70s, a bunch of behavioral scientists, they came up with the term designated driver because they were approached by some governments to help with reducing drink driving. So they came up with the concept of designated driver, but they didn't know how to market it. So they went to Hollywood and they asked screenwriters if they wouldn't mind incorporating this idea into their stories. And they were like, hey, it's only a line. It doesn't make any difference. So when people started seeing a show where a group of friends are going out and one person say, I'm the designated driver, and then none of the friends are pressuring them to drink, the bartender also knows they're the designated driver, so non-alcoholic only. And then people watching it say, hey, look, if Pedro Pascal can be the designated driver, I identify as Pedro Pascal, I'm cool like him, so I can be the, there's no shame associated with it. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, still, I think story, we're kind of getting into to like engaging with people, but like stories are huge in that regard, right? Getting people to hear a story, it kind of hits a little bit more.
Absolutely, yeah.
So cool. Well, anything you want to plug?
So everything you find you've heard today is found within the Know Before platform. Know Before for you.
No, go ahead. I love the Before. I have the blog post on an RSS feed, so I usually stay on top of it. I think it does another thing that I think security teams need to do. This kind of falls into threat intelligence, but it's really not. Just pay attention to some of the stuff that's and new techniques coming out. Like, you don't have to read everything, but read what's applicable to your industry. So I think Know Before does a really good job of collecting a lot of that information.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, we do like spend a lot of time just like, and sometimes you'll see the blogs are literally like just one paragraph long, but it's just like, hey, we saw this new technique, just beware. And that's one thing. It's if you're not looking for something, you're just going to miss it. It's like, I tell you, do a search for on YouTube afterwards for the invisible gorilla test. And
yeah.
Okay, yeah. It was like a road campaign, ad campaign that done by Transport for London. But do it if you haven't seen it. listeners, viewers, then I recommend trying it out. And it is a really good example of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then of course there's your editorial pieces, which are always good as well too. So, all right, Javvad, well, thank you for joining me to discuss user-centric design and security.
No, thank you so much. Appreciate it.